Welcome back everybody to KENAN TV. When it comes to the most dominant champion of the entire UFC, Khabib Nurmagomedov is definitely that guy, especially in the lightweight division's history. Nobody has ever been as dominant as he was, and this only begs the question, who can possibly beat him? So far, everybody that Khabib has fought, whether it was in the beginning of his career or his last fight, the difference between elite and amateur opponents seemingly all had the same outcome, which only makes us ask the question, who can possibly ever defeat Khabib, the Eagle Nurmagomedov? We could have an answer to that question April 19th, 2020 at UFC 249, in which the main event will be fought for the UFC lightweight title between Khabib and Tony himself. But before that night approaches, let's take a closer look why most people believe Tony El Cucuy Ferguson is the only man to defeat Khabib. What Tony Ferguson possesses is something that when you take a look at Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza, all of Khabib's last opponents, they simply could not really do what Tony Ferguson does. And when you take a look at Khabib, he's always been a fighter that utilizes a game plan that has never really been altered or changed over these last years. He has always been the same fighter when you take a look at him, fundamentally speaking. He's always been a very smart fighter who was able to control his opponents, take them down, and methodically break his opponents down and secure himself a submission or a decision victory. We know that all of Khabib's recent opponents, they were never really going to be beating him in the grappling department. When you take a look at Tony Ferguson, the likelihood of him beating Khabib in the grappling department himself are, I would say, highly unlikely. However, he has a way bigger chance at standing out and defending himself and actually making a fight in the grappling department himself. Now, I know I've been pretty vague, so right now let's just structure the entire video and let's just take a look at why people think and why I also believe that Tony Ferguson is really the only man to ever really put a serious threat and a challenge to Khabib's overall game. Let's look at him in the three main components of MMA, right? Striking, stamina, and grappling. Obviously these are very summarized categories and I'll dive into them a little bit more in detail as the video goes on. But if you're going to take a look at striking, out of all of Khabib's opponents, you could have easily said that all of them were simply way better than Khabib. But the problem with just striking is this: it is never going to be just a striking matchup with Khabib. Even if the fight does not go to the floor, the fighter that you're fighting is Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov, Sambo world champion and devastating wrestler. Your mind is already not focusing on how can I approach this fighter in terms of a just pure striking contest, because it is not going to be a pure striking contest when Khabib is continuously threatening to take you down. And because of this, all the strikers that fought Khabib, their striking game was always altered. They were never as comfortable as they normally would be against a fellow striker, right? They were always too tense and they were never really clear. They were never really in the flow state. So for them to fight somebody like Khabib, their best attribute already gets diminished by just having to anticipate Khabib taking them down. Now with Tony Ferguson, he's a fighter who is not afraid of being taken down, thus not really taking away from his entire game from the get-go, which makes him the most dangerous fighter that Khabib will ever face. Now, aside from the mentality for Tony Ferguson entering the octagon, we also have to look at him in terms of his abilities and what he's able to do in the stand-up department. Skill-wise, Tony Ferguson is tailor-made for Khabib Nurmagomedov. If you take a look at Tony Ferguson, he's a fighter who has high output, has rangy attacks, has unorthodox attacks as well, and is always relentless and always coming forward. Those 5 points, that's already a perfect stylistic opponent to defeat Khabib in the stand-up department alone. Many opponents either possessed one out of those points to a certain extent, to a certain extreme, but Tony Ferguson is very even across all those 5 points. For example, Conor McGregor, he had awesome forward pressure with, devastating punches, but he didn't have the activity. Dustin Poirier, he had the unorthodox combinations, but he didn't have the pressure. Michael Johnson, he had the output and speed, but he didn't have the pressure, right? All of those things these fighters had, but none of them truly had the entire package to come at Khabib. And Tony Ferguson is the only guy to ever be able to do that. For example, if you take a look at Khabib, as soon as the fight starts against Quinta, right? What you see see right here is him immediately going on the back foot. Khabib is a fighter who likes to stay at a pretty medium range. He does not like to fight in the pocket. He does not like to fight close up in the boxing range. He likes to have enough breathing room so he doesn't feel closed in or boxed in. And because of this, Khabib is more so inclined to immediately taking the outside and moving around, right? He did it with Al, he did it with Poirier, he did it with Conor as well. Now, out of those three fighters, Al Iaquinta was the only fighter who had, I would say, the best success by just simply coming forward and pressuring Khabib in all areas. He even threatened to take Khabib down, keeping Khabib's mind busy by doing this, right? And he never really overcommitted on shots. He always kept a very steady pace and very steady offensive output. And it is exactly right here where Tony Ferguson has always looked the most dominant, by coming forward, backing them up, and keeping them busy with quick punches that aren't really fully loaded with knockout power. He just keeps them busy. You know, the elbows come in here as well, the teep kicks, the body shots. Here is where Tony Ferguson starts to drown his opponents and starts to completely shut them down. And you may think to yourself, well, Kenan, you know, if this is the biggest weakness that Khabib has, why hasn't anybody really done anything about it? Well, you have to also think about the fact that Khabib is the best wrestler in the entire lightweight division. He will just shoot in on you. However, and this is the biggest factor in this entire video, when Khabib does shoot in for a takedown, he is rarely backed up against the cage, meaning the only time that he fully gets his takedowns and shoots is when he has somewhat of the ring generalship. He will first cement himself in the middle of the octagon, he will gain ring generalship, and then he will single leg you, put you against the fence, and then he will slowly drag you down to the mat. That is what he does the best. He has never been the fighter to go in there and shoot for a big double leg, lift the opponent up and slam them down. He has never been that type of a fighter. He has always been a very mechanical takedown artist. And the takedowns that Khabib failed to get the most were takedowns where he shot in for the takedown out of, let's just say, desperation when he was being backed up, right? When Al backed him up, Khabib just shot him for a takedown. But by doing this, essentially you are shooting in on a fighter who has the entire octagon, the entire ring to back up, to just backpedal and avoid you. And that is one of the main reasons why Khabib did not get the takedown on El Iaquinta, and he did not get the takedown on Conor McGregor in, I believe, the third round. And this is where things get very interesting. If Tony Ferguson can establish himself by coming forward, popping the jab, going to the teep kicks, going to the body, draining Khabib, keeping him busy high and low, if he can make sure that he at least defends the first two takedowns as Khabib is shooting in on him with his back up against the cage from that position, then he can start to really frustrate Khabib, and that is when mistakes will happen. And that is exactly where Tony Ferguson can start to capitalize and defeat Khabib. However though, Tony Ferguson has to be very careful because physically speaking, Tony Ferguson is a very elastic fighter. He's not like a big block of weight, right? You know what I mean? He's not like a big immovable object. He's just a fighter who is very elusive, very slick, and very smart. So when Khabib shoots in on Tony Ferguson, I would have to believe that physically speaking, Tony Ferguson is not really the fighter who is made to defend takedowns at all times from Khabib. I would have to say the only times Tony Ferguson can truly take advantage of Khabib coming in from that position and defend the takedowns will be exactly when he has enough distance and when he's just picking at Khabib. So other than that, I really just see Khabib taking him down at will almost every single time. And when Khabib does take him down, you would have to assume this. If Khabib takes down Tony Ferguson when Tony is backing him up, you would have to believe that Khabib either goes in for a single leg or a very rare double leg. If he does shoot in for a double leg, I would have to believe that Tony Ferguson will be very slick enough to put himself in full guard. And when he is in full guard, that is when Tony Ferguson is the most active. That is when the elbows start to come. That is when he starts to set up the rubber guard, the submissions, and he's being very active. That can be very problematic for Khabib because he has never ever had an opponent who would do that to him. However though, at the same time, you also have to realize this. When is the last time you saw Khabib take somebody down and he ended up in full guard? I personally can't remember it. Now why is this? Khabib is not a dumb fighter. He is arguably the smartest fighter in the entire division in my opinion. The way that Khabib takes you down is rarely by brute force. He's always being very mindful of the human anatomy. He knows that if we take the left ankle, that means he's gonna have his full body weight onto the right ankle, and if I do this and then this, like he's always planning, he's always plotting how he can be 2 or 3 steps ahead of you by the time he takes you down. And when this happens, it is always a takedown from the fence. He always uses the fence. Khabib will always use the fence. He will take you down down, he will make you sit up against the fence, he will sit on your legs, he will lock your legs, he will control the wrist, and then he will start to ground and pound you. That is how Khabib has always controlled all of his opponents, amateur to elite, because there's only so much that you can do in a position no matter what skill level that you are. So now we have to look at what triggers the fight to end up against the fence. Now it is pretty simple. Khabib is a pressure fighter at heart. He will back you up and then he will shoot in onto the legs. This is what happened against Dustin Poirier, right? Dustin was taking the outside on a fighter who was planning to pin him against the cage and then take him down. So the smartest move Dustin could have done in that fight was at least always come forward, but Dustin has never really been the fighter who really would utilize that type of a game plan or that type of a fighting style. The only fighters that ever really do that are Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor. And out of Tony and Conor, Tony is the fighter that will always be punching, be throwing. Conor throws one big shot and then it is kind of reset time, right? There is no reset time with Tony. So knowing the fact that Tony always likes to come forward and always pressure the opponent, keep them busy, and knowing the fact that Khabib likes to take the outside in the early rounds or to at least get some distance and have some breathing room to then shoot him for the takedown, you have to really favor Tony Ferguson to really just outpoint and just keep on hitting Khabib. And who knows, he may slip in an elbow and start cutting Khabib. So Tony Ferguson really is the guy that, stylistically speaking, is already a very tough matchup for Khabib. Additionally, if you take a look at his stamina, his cardio, the man is the best cardio fighter in the lightweight history. There's just nobody that comes close to him, even Khabib. And because of this cardio factor, he will not start fading like Conor McGregor did. He will be able to do what he did in the first round, in the second round, third round, fourth, fifth. So this is a very new obstacle that Khabib would have to essentially overcome. Will he do that? Well, we will just have to wait and see come fight night. For now, this could potentially be the only man to defeat Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov, and I would like to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. However, as I always like to say, in the end, only time will tell what will truly happen. For now, I have been Kenan from KENAN KTV, signing off. Later.